Welcome to another episode of Talking College Football with JJ Kitchen. Of course, I'm your host, JJ Kitchen. A big day in the ACC and FSU. FSU has its lawsuit dismissed in court today down in Florida. That looks like a major win for the ACC, right? Maybe not so. One thing we're going to go over today, this fight is long from over. And today, if anything, wasn't really a win, but more of a stalemate. Before we get into it, guys, of course, the show is sponsored by the local company here in Pittsburgh, PA. Colonial Beer, located at 4986 Library Road in Bethel Park, PA. Go over there today. Great selection between your light beers, your lagers, your heavy lagers, but also two different ways, especially to get beers. The Fake Slide Pilsner, which helps support Alliance 412, which is the preferred collective of the University of Pittsburgh. But guys, as we get into it today, I'm going to share two things with you I thought that were really interesting immediately when the decision came through to dismiss the motion for Florida State. One, there is a lot of stuff behind this. One of the things I've been portraying for a while now is that this fight is long from over. There's a lot to do. There's still a lot of things going on. Both sides are still trying to deliver haymakers. Obviously, ACC trying to keep it in North Carolina, obviously, which would be really helping the ACC at this point in terms of jurisdiction. But obviously, too, in Leon County with Florida State down in Florida, that's been a major aspect of this game, too. We have a decision here in Florida for the time being. And these two sources I thought were really good when you look at an attorney, a couple analysts. I thought these were two really good things to take a look at. So what I'm going to do here, go here and share the screen to give you guys an idea of where I'm looking at. And a couple quick short threads. Obviously, David Hale, we'll start there. So we pull it up here. Obviously, you're going to see here David Hale. Okay, obviously works for ESPN, has done a good job over the years when covering the ACC. Basically, in a short thread, first thing we're going to go over here. So all this comes with a usual caveat that I'm not a lawyer and only a mildly competent reporter, obviously throwing some shade at people. Obviously, David Hale has been doing this for numerous of years. And one of the things I like about it is that he's been even keel, not joining one side or the other. It's about really just looking at this plainly and seeing that today, where some people may see it as a win for the ACC, more of kind of like a draw and where this goes going forward. But don't think there's much of a takeaway from today's proceedings in Tallahassee, FSU versus the ACC. Quick thread. As we go through it here, the judge effectively kicked the can by ruling in favor of the ACC, but allowing FSU to refile. The just moves the timeline with any real change to the substance. Judge also requires mediation, but that's SOP in these situations. ACC does not seem eager to deal. Could we get to a point where mediation is the ultimate remedy? Sure. But at this point, nothing in the courts has provided motivation for the ACC to do that, and I'm told no serious conversations along that line have occurred. Lots more to come in courtrooms, but if we continue to have two parallel paths, the race to judgment would seem to favor the outcome in North Carolina, where things are moving more efficiently and we're losing side appeals directly to the North Carolina Supreme Court. In other words, the TLDR on this remains the same as it is in August 23rd, December 23rd, or last week. We're a long way away from finishing and from the finish line. So those are the first things I wanted to really talk about. I think David does a really good job here. Again, just getting to the point where there's no emotion on either side. Really, when you look at this on face value, yes, it looks like a win for the ACC. You're basically getting out of what's going on down in Florida, but only for the time being. They're allowed to refile. They're allowed to jump back in. The question that really David brings up here, and I think is a valid point from anybody that I've talked to, especially attorneys, not just analysts, but actual attorneys that go behind the scenes, reading everything from top to bottom. The first thing that really came to notice was the fact that the ACC at this point has the upper hand because everything's moving smoothly in North Carolina to get to the North Carolina Supreme Court to say, hey, jurisdiction stays here, but more importantly, what they're looking at between Florida State and the ACC is how much is it going to pay to get out. Clemson's is more of a direct question in terms of what can they do, to where they've filed a lawsuit that says, hey, we're not looking to leave, parentheses, but we still see ourselves as ACC members, but what would it take to get out? They're looking in that term. We'll get more of it down the road, but here's my thing. They're not just looking. Clemson is looking to get out of the ACC. It's been well known. It's been well documented. That's why these two schools are going at it. But as I stop sharing here, get to my other source here. This one from an attorney. Obviously, this one I want to show just because, one, it's more on the basis of siding with Florida State. But I think that this goes into it just a little bit more here. Obviously, Twist and Hook, who's a Cal alum, does a lot of stuff for Cal in terms of also being able to support Cal. Looks like the ACC won, in quotations, the motion today in Florida, which was a bit surprising to me. I agree with Rohan Law that losing a motion to dismiss like this isn't fatal to the case. FSU will have another opportunity. However, it does delay the Florida proceeding, which benefits the ACC in another way. The ACC is trying to push its North Carolina proceeding forward as fast as possible, and delay Florida helps prioritize their North Carolina complaint. But if we dive in here, Rohan Law obviously has been well known in documenting things that go on with Florida State. Says here, Florida State complaint dismissed. Must be refiled with more specificity. And Judge Cooper grants the motion to dismiss with leave to amend on this issue of personal jurisdiction. He takes the time to make very clear that neither side is winning here. He needs a more clear analysis of the issue of jurisdiction, and that would be inappropriate in a case worth $500 million that we need to get this right. Perhaps the initial consideration was to file in federal court, but the language in the statute in Florida is clear on what needs to be alleged. So Florida State, no one's winning or losing. Rohan Law talks about this. Obviously, the judge in Florida has really given Florida State the benefit of the doubt in terms of what their case looks like. And this certainly, in my opinion, actually helps Florida State go back to the drawing board, figure out, okay, we need to be more specific is what it comes down to. And Rohan Law also puts in here, Judge Cooper knows and understands the issues, but in such a high-profile case, he wants to get it right and not have an appellate issue where the ACC can argue they were not placed on notice as to what they need to do to defend against. This is not ideal, but this is more embarrassing than fatal to the case. Parties will be told periodically to do this, and other than delaying the case, it doesn't really have much of a bearing. I think that when you look at this overall, again, you look at this, there's still a long way to go in this process. Obviously, it's a short-term win for the ACC to move forward. FSU has to go back to the drawing board to understand the more specifics of what they're complaining about, what they're trying to argue, what their specific size looking at to this point. In my opinion, again, I think this actually helps Florida State in the long term. Of course, it's not going to help. It's not helpful in the current moment, because if North Carolina continues to move the way it's going, that's going to be an issue for Florida State. And I think they know that. That's why I would not be shocked that they go back to the drawing board. We possibly see a refile at the end of today, potentially the end of today or into the early morning on Tuesday, potentially. But also, too, we go into this here. If I can go back here. Also here, one of the things that was very known here, I thought was a great note, hearing in North Carolina on 5/2/2024 to discuss discovery. ACC hoping to push through on discovery, then and delay discovery in Florida. This ruling in Florida helps the ACC, which obviously we have clarified. I think it's kind of helped, obviously, the ACC, but in a way, I kind of do believe it actually helps Florida State as long as things continue in a timely manner for Florida State. But two, usually parties want more than 1 week to amend. Usually they want 30 days in my experience. Florida State is trying to push this forward in Florida as fast as possible because they understand the constraints that they're currently into this point, and it's been well documented. So again, I think when you look at this from an overall, from a a natural perspective to where you're not looking at Florida State side, you're not looking at the ACC side, you're looking at both. It's more of a draw. And I'm with really David Hale on this to where it looks like a win on the surface because depending upon what the time limit looks like. But the question I think that people need to ask at this point is if it goes forward in North Carolina the way it's supposed to go, yes, Florida State's in a jam. But if it does slow up somehow to where Florida State creates a case, especially when they go back to North Carolina, does that really help them? And I think it can. So it's not personally out of the equation just yet, but Florida State needs to get going. I mean, this is a little bit of a setback in the terms of where they are right now. If they're able to get in there within, honestly, in the next, I would say 2 or 3 days. I think a week's a little bit too long. I think they need to get back on board very quickly to get this going in the right direction. That's number one. But I think that when you look at these two really battling it out, you really need Florida State to say, hey, go back and take a look at this. They certainly will not take the 30 days, obviously, so as you talked about there, as you saw in the tweet there, that's just too long. They got to move forward with this quickly. But I think if they go back to the drawing board and they really look at, okay, what are we really specifically looking at? And it goes a little bit different than what Clemson's doing to where they're surfacing into the point where they want to see what will it take. And this is really what the court case is about, the lawsuit in general, is how much is this going to take? I think that the numbers that have been thrown around is really in that 545 to potentially $575 million, which is crazy to think about in general, how large this case really is. And I agree with Rohan that when you look at this case, it's so big and it's so massive that, $500 million is $500 million. If you're charged to pay this, it could certainly sink a university. Obviously, Florida State, a great brand in terms of college football, but their endowment's not as large. It's one of the things that's been well known. Obviously, there's still questions on where does Florida State go from here. One of the things that really came out recently that I've been on trying to tell people is that it's very clear that the SEC does not want Florida State or Clemson for numerous reasons, but the main reason is pro rata. Obviously, it's not bringing anything towards the SEC. There's a reason why they're doing that. I think that the best bet that what they can go to at this point would be the Big Ten. I think that's really the only thing in the parameters that would make sense. For the Big 12 people, I had a number of Big 12 people reach out to me because obviously I have sources between the SEC and the Big Ten. They said, what are the chances that the Big 12 can go out and get Florida State? And I say absolutely zero. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, the two you're looking at right now that really control the destiny of everybody is the SEC and the Big Ten. It makes the most sense. Those are the two that really between revenue, but also strength in terms of being able to make connections. I think when I look at college football overall, I think each conference in the Power Four certainly has teams in it that makes sense to say there are major great teams in these sections to where you've got the Clemsons, the Florida States. I think North Carolina certainly has jumped up to a certain point. Miami continues to try to find itself. Obviously, Pitt had a bad year last year, but they won the ACC 2 years ago. NC State is a good program. I think they're really good. They've just not gotten over that hump yet to get to the ACC championship game, to really get that next level. Dave Doran's still working on that. But overall, you look at the teams in the ACC, there are certainly a number of good teams. There are a number of good teams in the SEC. Obviously, people think it's top-loaded for the most part because of Georgia, Alabama. I think when you look at those two schools, but obviously you'll have those other schools in there trying to float around. I think Ole Miss has done a hell of a job in terms of the transfer portal, bringing in numerous guys. Again, I think they've really loaded up on what they need to do. I think Auburn's still a little ways to go. They continue to try to get there and try to get through the portal. I think Tennessee can come out at times where they're able to compete. They need to get to that next point. Josh Heupel's still working on that. A couple of years ago, had him at number one at one point, but fell off towards the end of the year. The same thing goes for the Big Ten. Obviously, the Big Ten with Michigan really running the Big Ten at this point. We'll see what they do with, obviously, their new head coach. Obviously, being on staff, Coach Moore. Obviously, you still have Ohio State. Now you have Washington and Oregon. You still have Penn State there. And obviously, two in the Big 12. I think that really the Big 12's question mark at this point is the parity looks great, but there are no dominant football teams in those conferences when you look at across the board. And obviously, I think Utah will run that conference as it goes forward because of, one, their just consistency when it comes to battling, obviously. But overall, when you look at this lawsuit, it's a dismissal for Florida State, but as David Hale says, and I agree with it, this is still a long ways to go. We are nowhere near the end of this. I think we're going to start to get to discovery eventually when it comes down to May. We're no near a conclusion. So I think that when you look at it as fans, look at it from both sides of the angle and really look at both sides and just do the pros and cons. It's kind of a draw today. People might say it's a win for the ACC, but I think you look at it more of a draw when you really dive into it. Guys, that's another episode of Talking College Football with JJ Kitchen. If you haven't done so, subscribe to the channel. Like the channel. Let me know your thoughts. Who won today? Who lost today? Was it a draw like you think? I believe it is. But of course, we're going to continue to drop more and more content as always. So again, subscribe to the channel and like the video. It certainly helps out the algorithm. Guys, as always, in forever to college football, to the ACC, but more importantly, hail to Pitt. I'll see you guys around.